Yo, Lorna, thank you. It's first time on this Vonage Dev Twitch stream, and you got to get the audio right. That's an important thing. So, Lorna, I appreciate that. I had said, welcome to the first episode of Vonage Gems, which is a new Ruby-themed stream in the Vonage channel. We'll be discussing all things Ruby, the fantastic developer-friendly language which brings us developer happiness. And we'll be talking about Ruby and Ruby on Rails, and not only Rails, but other frameworks as well, even framework-less Ruby applications and what kind of cool stuff you can build with it. Sometimes it'll just be me, and other times we'll be joined by other Ruby friends, including in 2 weeks' time, joined by a special Ruby friend from our team here at Vonage. But today is just me, and who am I? Well, I am Ben Greenberg, and I am one of the members of the DevRel team, developer relations team at Vonage, and I have a lot of fun as the Ruby developer advocate, which means I get to play with Ruby a lot, practically all day. I mean, could you really ask for a better job? I don't think so, but I guess others could disagree. But in my personal opinion, it is probably one of the best jobs you could have, just playing with Ruby all day. And so what are we going to do on this new series, this bi-weekly series of Vonage Gems? We are going to spend time together talking about different Ruby applications you could build with the Vonage suite of communications APIs, different tooling you could use to build those applications, fun, cool stuff you could do, and maybe break some things along the way, learn to fix some of them when we break them, learn to not fix some of them and struggle with them live together, because that's the joy of live working together, live coding. So it'll be an adventure. It'll be a journey. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. It's definitely a beautiful rainy day here where I live near Tel Aviv in Israel to be doing this. So with the rain pattering outside my window and Twitch together, let's get started on our first episode, our first edition. So what we want to do together today is we're going to follow through this tutorial that came out a few months ago that happened to be that I wrote it. So, it is what it is. So if there's mistakes in it, it's all my fault. And there probably will be. And this tutorial asks us to do the following thing, which is we want to scrape a website. Web scraping is where you go to a website that doesn't necessarily have a public-facing API, a way to get its data programmatically built into its sort of like feature set. And you go to the website and say, I want to get that data programmatically. So I'm going to access that website as if I'm accessing it in a browser and get the content from it that I want in order to manipulate that content for my own application's needs. That's in a nutshell essentially what web scraping is. So we're going to use web scraping to get updates on something, and we're going to take those updates and send them to ourselves, send them to others, send them to subscribers with the Vonage SMS API. A lot of use cases for this, a lot of reasons why you might want to do this. I'm committed to trying to keep this stream within an hour's time because I can end up talking for long periods of time, which many enjoy and maybe not everyone enjoys. But I'm going to try and contain it to within this hour of time together. So if we don't finish the tutorial today, don't fret. Have no fear, my friends, because this tutorial lives, the working code, the full code for this tutorial lives on our open source repositories on GitHub. And you can clone it and you can download it to your local computer and you can run it with the instructions. So if we don't finish it, working it through today, you can find it on GitHub. And I will show you that link where it is before we finish. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to scrape the web, building a Ruby on Rails application to do that, and then using the Vonage SMS API to send those updates to us and to anyone else who might be interested. So there's a lot of different websites we can use when we think about scraping the web that we might want to use as an example website. So many contexts, so many examples, from the most serious to the most, one maybe could say frivolous. What we're going to do is we're going to scrape the website called isittheweekend.com. I don't know if any of you have heard of isittheweekend.com. It answers a very simple question, which yet for many of us is a very important question. Is it the weekend? Weeks can be long, especially 2020, and we might want to know that answer. Maybe we forgot what day it is. I don't know about you, but I've been in those moments where I forgot the day, and I want to know, is today a weekend? Oh, well, it happens to be today, whatever day it is, Wednesday. It is not the weekend, so the answer is no. So we are going to scrape this website for isittheweekend.com, and we're going to send that answer to all the people who want to know whether the weekend is today or not, with that answer, yes or no. That's what we're going to do. That's our objective. Sound pretty good? It's pretty fun. It's an important question for many of us, as I said, especially in this year of 2020. And that's going to be our objective together. So the first thing you want to do, which I already took care of doing, is just to generate a new Ruby on Rails application. And we use the built-in sort of CLI in Rails with the keyword of new, passing in the name that we want to call this application. And in this case, what we want to call it is the Weekend Checker app. Pretty descriptive. It is named for what it does. And we want to say that it will have a database using PostgreSQL as its database. Rails defaults to SQLite, which is great, and but SQLite's not always so great for when you're porting to cloud providers to host your application. Like, let's say Heroku, for example, does not have SQLite support, but it does have PostgreSQL support. So it just makes it much easier and a bit of a less painful transition to initiate your application immediately with PostgreSQL. So that's what we're going to do. So we did that already, and this is the scaffold of our application. Like most Ruby on Rails applications, it looks very similar as a starter application. You have in it the app folder, which contains essentially all the logic for your application. You'll have a bin folder, which is where all the executable files are. Like when you run Rails, that's where it is, et cetera, et cetera. The database is contained under the folder called DB. Your logic files will be within both in lib, and then also your custom configurations for how you boot the application, the different routes that are defined to your web application, and all other sorts of different configurable options will live under config. And then, of course, there's a test folder that is built in sort of default unless you specify not to build it, which will contain sort of like a early built sort of test suite, which when run will all pass through because it's testing the most basic things to basically just give you an overview, sort of like a scaffold of testing that you can then expand upon, and then a public folder to store assets and images. And that's essentially what you're looking for here. And so the first thing we want to do in this brand new baby Ruby on Rails application is we want to initialize with our dependencies. The other gems, the Ruby gems, which are executables you can add to your application that we want to add into ours to add to our functionality. And you see we have a list here. One is called Nexmo. This tutorial was written in March, and since then, as part of our transition from Nexmo to the family of Vonage, our Ruby SDK has also transitioned its namespacing to Vonage. The Nexmo Ruby SDK is no longer actively supported, except for critical bug fixes for the next 12 months or so. But for any new features, the gem is actually called Vonage now. And then we have these other gems which enable us to do web scraping. Watir web drivers, which so Watir is actually a pretty cool gem. So let's actually take a peek at it for a second. So Watir is an acronym, and it stands for, where is it? It just said it a moment ago in the SEO results. Watir stands for Web Application Testing in Ruby. So its actual objective is to allow you to test live websites in your testing suite and to simulate browsers in your testing suite. So that's its like core functionality, but it has this tertiary functionality because of what it does. You can actually use it to access websites as if you were accessing them with Firefox or with Chrome or what have you. So that's Watir. And then web drivers is what we're going to use the Chrome WebDriver, for example. So we're going to incorporate into our Rails application the ability to act like it's a Chrome browser. The whenever gem. So what does the whenever gem do? Let's just check that out. Ruby gem, Google is always your friend. Whatever gem, basically what it does is it provides with clear syntax for writing and deploying cron jobs. Cron jobs are, if you're not familiar, schedulers. So you want to say something like, I want this application to run every day at this time of the day. That would be a cron job. I want it to run twice a week. That's another cron job. The whenever gem provides you with clearer, perhaps more understandable syntax when reading it for writing these cron jobs. So you install the whenever gem into your application in the gem file. And then an example would be like, let's find it here. So every one day at 4:30 a.m. due, and then you see, look at the instance method here. Task to run at 4:30 in the morning. And then every day at 12:20 a.m. roles. You can define the roles for this cron job. And so it really has like really cool, or every 2 hours, really cool, really kind of like accessible language to build these schedules with. So I like using it for that purpose. One of the things I like about Ruby so much is that it's pretty accessible in its syntax. And the more we can extend that in the ways we use it, just the better it is, in my opinion. And then we're going to use the .env Rails gem, which allows us to, for example, if we had a .env file is where we would store environment variables that we're going to use. Most commonly in our applications, we're using our API credentials in these environment variables. They're sensitive pieces of data that once they're exposed in a public way, like if you commit them to your GitHub repository or the like, then you would need to really erase them and rebuild them because they're compromised. So in order to help not do that and to also access them securely in application, the .env Rails gem sort of wraps that functionality for us. And so those are the gems we're going to install. So we go to the gem file. We see a nice sort of standard Ruby on Rails gem file here with all the stuff that it had already built for us. So we're just going to make a couple spaces here and add these gems. So as I said, the Nextmode gem has switched to the Vonage namespace. So we're going to use that. Watir for the browser accessing, web drivers for simulating the Chrome WebDriver to act like Chrome in the browser, for example, but it could be other web drivers as well. We're going to use it for the Chrome WebDriver. We're going to use the whenever gem, as we mentioned what it does. And lastly, but certainly not least, is the .env Rails gem. So we're going to do that. And then what we're going to do then is also run bundle install. So let me just make this a little bigger. Hopefully it's a little more visible. And running bundle install. We already installed the basic gems that it comes with by default, and now we're going to install the specific ones we just added. And you see that it's adding these new things in green. Of course I can, yeah, 100%. When I get back to VS Code, I'll make the font bigger as well. And so we had added, let's just make that even a little bigger. My eyes are getting worse every day, so and they were bad to begin with, so I totally understand. And even if one's eyes are not bad, it's just hard to read screens sometimes. Trust me, I know this all too well. So we see that the green ones are the ones that are now newly installed into our application. And these are dependencies of the various applications, the various gems that we installed. So we see here Vonage, we fetch Vonage 100%, Vonage 7.2.1, fetch Watir 6.17, fetch whenever, and then somewhere in here will also be the .env Rails gem. So we installed that, and okay, let's make this a little bigger as well. How's that, Lorna? Is that a good size? What do you think? I think that's a good size. It's visible at least, even for those watching on a mobile device. Mobile is becoming so, we used to talk about mobile first for years now, but I think like we're genuinely at mobile first at this point. Like, I think the first point of entry, think we could safely say, and maybe there's data to back this up, but just anecdotally, the first point of entry for the vast majority of people on this planet to a website, it might be the mobile phone at this point. which is pretty cool. And woohoo for gems. So if we look at our gem file lock file, which is sort of like, if you're familiar with the landscape in JavaScript, it might be like a package.json, package.json.lock, right? Something like that, a package lock.json, which it basically stores the actual versioning of all the gems we have. So we see all the default gems were installed by Ruby and Rails automatically. And then if we look here for Vonage, well, there's the Vonage gem and you see its dependencies indented under it. So that's pretty cool. So now we have our gems, which brings us to our next step, which is to create our database schema and models. So what we want to do is we want to have the ability for people to sign up to this SMS update for the weekend and with their phone numbers. So we need a database to store these subscribers with their phone numbers. And so we're going to create two different database tables. One we're going to call recipients, which is going to be the list of subscribers with their phone numbers. And the other one we're going to call diff storage. And this is going to copies of the website data to compare against to determine if there was a change. So, you know, we went to, just to refresh our memories, is it, where is it? Let me just load it from here because I don't know why it's not stored up there. So where is this at the weekend? There it is. So we went to isittheweekend.com earlier, and the answer was no, right? We want to check on a schedule in a cron job if that answer is different today than it was from yesterday. And so we need to store that answer from yesterday in order to compare it against. So we are going to create, therefore, a table to store those copies. Thankfully, the amount of data that we're storing each day is relatively small. It's a few strings, a few characters in a text string. It's not a lot of data. It's not going to hold a lot of data. It's small. If we were holding more data, we might want different implementations of this, but for our purposes, it suits our purposes. So we can again use the beauty of Rails built-in handy keywords in its CLI to generate this stuff. So we are going to say Rails generate, right? Generate does what it sounds like, generate. A model. A model is where you would store the logic, the business logic for that database table. So every database table is connected to a model, which is like structured like a typical object-oriented class, and the logic in there corresponds to that database table that you've created. So there's actually a fancy word for that: object relational data, ORMs, object relational models, something along those lines. There's much smarter people than me who can tell you the actual term for that. But every table and model, every table is connected to a model which has the business logic for it. So we're going to create a model, and this model we're going to call recipient, and it's going to have two different database columns, number, which is going to be a string, and subscribed, which is going to be a boolean being true or false. We of course want to have subscribed because it's important. Just as we want people to be able to subscribe, we want people to be able to unsubscribe as well. Nothing worse than being stuck on an SMS update list that you can't get off of. So we want to be able to have that option and store when people leave and no longer wish to know whether it's the weekend or not. So we are going to create this model, and that's running in the background. And what it's doing is it's creating different files in our application and storing them. And we actually see what it did. It created a file in database/migrate, and it's time stamped. And then it's given the name create recipients. This is a create action in the PostgreSQL database. Create a table called recipient. And you notice sort of the language is really important in Rails. So the model is singular, recipient. The database is plural, recipients, because it's the model of recipients. So it's like sort of like you're creating the abstract cat, about which all cats will be generated from here to forth. So there is the cat, the platonic cat, and then each of the cats subsequently come from that cat. So there is the recipient, the model of recipient, which is linked to the actual instances of that recipient, which are recipients, right? And then it creates some test files for us as well, and also creates the actual model file, which under models, app models, recipient. So we've created our recipient model. Let's also create our diff storage model. diff storage, and diff storage is going to have one column of data, website data, which is going to hold text. String typically is for smaller quantities of data, and text is for larger amount of text. So we, in order to accommodate larger strings, we're going to use the text data type model in this database column. And so we do that, and it's going to make very similar files, different name. So we have a diff storages, right? And then we have diff storage for the model. Pretty cool. And if we actually go look at our application, we can find these files. So if we go to database, migrate, and then we see two timestamp files here. One of them is create recipients, and we see it's a class with a class method, create recipients, which inherits from this active record class, which is where all the logic for Rails database magic lies. And then it's got this class method called change, which creates a table called recipients holding a string with a name of number and a Boolean column with a name of subscribed, and adds timestamps automatically for you. So every action is timestamped, and you'll see something very similar in the diff storages, a text column with the name of website data and timestamped. And if we go look at the models of our application, we will see two model files. Recipient, they're empty, right? Because there's nothing in that yet. There's no business logic. Recipient and application inherits from application record, which is where all the logic that connects the business logic, all the logic in Rails that connects the business logic of recipient here to the table called recipients. Hey, Exegete, nice to see you. Welcome to our inaugural Ruby stream. And then we see the similar file here for diff storage. So we've created our models. The next thing we want to do is create, and this in the tutorial says what I just said now. We want to create the the messenger and scraper models. So we now have a model to hold the diffs from the isittheweekend.com. So from is today different than yesterday? And we have a model to hold the subscribers who want to get this update every day. Now we want to create a model, two models, one which will hold the business logic of the scraping of the website. I know, Ruby, it's awesome, Exegete, I agree with you. And one other model called Messenger, which will hold the business logic of sending these messages using the Vonage SMS API to the users. These models, unlike the previous two, this is an important point, don't need database tables. We're not actually persisting this data. I'm not interested at all, actually, in knowing whether or not this happened, how many times this happened, etc. I mean, I guess I could theoretically be interested in it, but at this moment, at this time, this does not interest me. So what I'm interested in is just a place to store and contain that logic. There are different places in my Rails application where I could store that logic. I could put that logic in my controllers, which I have not yet built yet. Controllers sort of control the flow of a website route. So like when you go to like my website /new, so you have a controller for that, let's say the application, and a method called new, which corresponds to that website, mywebsite.com/new, which would have all the sort of like flow for that. But it's sort of Rails practice to not put a lot of business logic in the controller. So we need a place for it. So we could put it inside services, which if I can find that, controllers, models, config, database. It's actually not even built here. So it's something that's custom. You can add a services folder inside your app folder, which would be a place you can add those sort of services. So something that is used across your application, which again, the messenger functionality and the scraper functionality could fit there as well. So there are different places we could do it. And sort of the beauty of Rails is, yes, it's opinionated, but it's opinionated in like sort of like not always 100% committed to every opinion kind of way. It gives you some level of flexibility, which is kind of cool in my opinion. So we're going to put it inside a model. And so the way we do that without also creating a table at the same time is passing in this flag of -- migration equaling to false. We don't want a migration for this file. So if we do that and we go Rails generate model messenger -- migration equals false, we'll create a messenger model, and you notice the difference between these two log outputs from the one right above it and the one right now is that we see the messenger model, but we don't see a database migrate file because we told it not to do that. And similarly, we're going to do the same thing for the scraper model. So generate model scraper and migration equals false, and we have these files. Do I subscribe to any services gem? No, actually, I don't. Exegete, that's a great question. Do you subscribe to any services gem? Trailblazer, DryRB? It's a really good question. We've taken advantage of sort of the whole modality of Rails services within some of our tooling in Vonage. So if you would look at, for example, our platform tool called Station, we extend a lot of its functionality through building custom services. And it's really cool, actually, and it's like a great sort of paradigm. But no, I don't actually subscribe to any services gem. But now I know that one of the first things I'm going to do after we finish streaming today is I'm going to actually look up these things. So I appreciate that. So we have now these two models, Scraper, and we look in here in the models folder just to make sure they're there, and they are there. Recipient and Scraper, beautiful. And just to mention, as what we said before, so we have diff storage, which will check for any differences in the website data, recipient, which manages adding and removing subscribers, messenger, which manages the sending of SMS messages, and scraper, which is responsible for scraping the website for data. Pretty cool. So we have that. Now we're actually going to, before we do that, let's actually execute this. So if you noticed, these things, the database files, these things, what are these things? The database files is inside this subfolder called migrate, right? Which is a clue of what we might want to do with them is we want to migrate them. We want to move them into our database and create our schema. So we can do that by actually running rake db migrate, which will take those files that we have created using our generators and commit them to our database. So that will run in the background for a moment. We do not have a database, but that's okay. We can create the database. So this is PostgreSQL. We have a lot of different kind of CLI tools to create a database with. And we can do that with create DB on the command line, passing the name of the database table we want to create. We now create the database, and if we run migrate again, it should have a database to actually migrate into, which is important. It's a small point. You need a database to actually create into. And you see that we've created the table of recipients and created the table of diff storages. Pretty cool, if I have to say so myself. Rails is pretty awesome. Yeah, I'm going to definitely check out Trailblazer Exegete when I get a chance. Hello, Kevin. Nice to have you join us. Welcome to Ruby Magic, brought to you by Vonage. And I can see there's a clip being brought out at some point for like promotion. Welcome to Ruby Magic, brought to you by Vonage. Okay, so now we have created our database schema. We want to start defining some of that business logic inside our models that we created. And mind me, I'm going to take a drink of my, this is iced Nespresso. This is not Starbucks, it's iced Nespresso. It happens to be Starbucks cups are the largest coffee cups I can find on the planet. So I like drinking a lot of coffee. So I use my Starbucks cups. I buy a new one every time I go to America and bring it back with me because of its size. And I like iced espresso the most. A little personal detail. Okay, so we're going to create the business logic for our diff storage model. So let's open up our diff storage model. As we mentioned, it's empty. It inherits from this application record class, which is a built-in helper class within Rails. And we're going to define a couple class methods here that will give us some help in running our application to check whether or not there's been a change in the website that we're checking. So the first one is URL. So what we're going to do in URL is literally just a string. The string will be the URL of the website we're checking. We could have just put this in the methods itself, but whatever we can abstract out, if we're ever going to possibly change this, might as well put it in its own method so that it becomes a bit easier to change down the road if we want to, and we don't have to find all the instances of this URL string. We can just find the one class method and change it. So the string we want to check, I'm going to copy and paste that so I don't mess it up, is it theweekend.com. We now have the string, pretty relatively straightforward method. Sports Direct has a massive coffee cup, Greg, but not glass or with a straw. Yeah, so I need glass because I think it's easier to clean. Although I think this might be plastic. It sounds like plastic. And straws to me are just like integral. And I like reusable straws for the environmental impact. And I could not bear having to use a straw that I would just throw away after. So the combination of reusable straw, and I think this is plastic actually, which means if I drop it, it won't break as easily, which is always lovely for the klutz that I am at times. It's a good win-win. Okay. And the next model is the next class method we're going to build in this model, is check last record. So we want to get from our database the last data that we collected yesterday, if we're doing this daily, from isittheweekend.com, and we want to capture that data from our database and then get the new data and then see if it's the same or not. That's what we want this method to do. So self check last record. We want to get today's answer. So today's answer is going to be what we're going to call when we is going to be what we get from isittheweekend.com today. And you see we're actually referencing, first of all, the class method of self.url, which is up here, is at the weekend. And we're also referencing a method called call in the scraper class, which we haven't built yet, but that's okay. We build these things, we reference them, imagine they exist, and then build out from our imagination into reality. It's kind of the wonder of being a software developer, right? You can imagine things, imagine worlds of code, imagine worlds of functionality, and then build it out with code. Pretty cool. And then we're going to say, so we got today's answer. If diff storage any, so first thing we want to, not storage, storage.any. I think the two most common developer mistakes or developer problems are off by one errors and typos. If diff storage.any, any is a built-in Rails Rails method, which essentially says, are there any of these things, right? It's calls for what it is called for what it is. If there is anything in the diff storage, so then yesterday's answer, we're going to instantiate a new local variable called yesterday's answer, will be from the last record in the most recent record, which is .last, the most recent record in there, which is from the last time we scraped the website. If there's nothing in there, if this if there's nothing in diff storage, well, there's probably a couple reasons for that. The most common reason, perhaps, why there would be nothing yet in there is we have not yet done this application. We've not yet executed it. So today will be the first day we're executing it, which means today's data is today's data. Today's answer is also yesterday's answer, in other words. So then we want to say yesterday's answer is an empty string. Not an empty string with a semicolon, but empty string. And it's already there. Oh, I love the helpers. I forget sometimes they're there. So either yesterday's answer is the record that we most recently scraped, or it is an empty string, depending on if there's anything in the database itself, in the table. And then we want to, once we have that, we are then going to invoke a class method from the messenger model class, which we've, again, not yet built because we're imagining it. We're envisioning what we will build, called send update message. And it takes a couple of parameters. Do I see another one there? Yes. Okay, 3 parameters. I'm going to copy these. It takes, first of all the recipients. It takes yesterday's answer and today's answer as its parameters. So that's the method. In this method, if we were building this, and I always give this caveat whenever I'm working on demo applications, if we were building this for actual production, we would want to do a lot more validation here than we're doing. We want to validate sort of the the data that we're expecting. We want to essentially want to validate our assumptions. We would want to validate the assumptions around today's answer. Is it what we think it is? We want to validate yesterday's answer. We want to validate the recipient.all. Are they who we think they would be? And we want, and maybe other things as well. And so we would create a lot of different validations before we'd actually go through and execute each of these definitive steps. But this is the caveat. This is a demo application. So we're less interested in validating. We're more interested in having a little bit of fun, if that makes sense. In other words, add more testing, add more validations when it's a production application. So we have this method, self.checkLossRecord. And this is all we're putting right now in diff storage. Kind of cool. If there's any questions at all at this point, please, you're welcome to ask them. Any comments, please, you're welcome to offer them. Love to hear your questions or comments. I may not have a good answer, but there are others in the stream who might. And if not, we can look it up together and figure it out. None of us knows everything, and we can have fun exploring and learning together. Okay. Now let's define the business logic for the scraper model. So as we mentioned, the diff storage model checks and compares against the differences. The scraper model will be the actual model that scrapes the website and gets the data for us. So this model actually has a couple dependencies inside of itself. It needs to be able to scrape the web. So we're going to say require Nokogiri, require WebDriver's Chrome driver, and require Watir. And then we're going to give it a few class methods. One is going to be a class method called call, which, if you remember, we had already invoked in diff storage here, where we said scraper.call, and we passed in the URL of what we're calling to scrape. So we're now going to actually create that method. So self.call with the URL and self.getURL, URL. And again, we don't have getURL yet, but we're going to build that in just a moment. Bundler does require these for you. And as I was typing them, Exegete, so Exegete asks, can I actually show this? Yeah. Doesn't Bundler require these for you? So the require statements up there? Yes, you're totally right. And as I was typing them right now, since writing this tutorial, I was like, I think I don't need to write those require statements. You are correct. So let's actually take them out. You are totally correct. So let's take them out. Thank you for that. So self.getURL with the URL. So we need to get sort of the object of the website. So http party.get. Yes, I did actually a little bit of intro of what Bundler does for us in the beginning, and what a gem file is, etc. It is essentially awesome. It's a one-word term for it. It's awesome. So the doc is going to be a sort of object of the HTTP doc with a bunch of different attributes. And so we're going to get that. And then we're also going to define an instance of the browser using Watir. And so we call browser.new from the Watir class. And we say we want a Chrome browser and we want it to be headless. The headless thing is really cool. I actually kind of like running it with headless being false sometimes. So headless will either want to do one of two things, whether it's true or false. Headless is saying, do I want to see this happening as it's happening? That might be the simplest way to explain it. Do I want to see the accessing of the website as it's being accessed? If I do, then headless would be false. If I don't, then headless would be true. So sometimes I actually do kind of want to see it happen. So for example, here in Israel, where I live, when school's in session in between coronavirus lockdowns, which is a whole nother subject, our parents are required to fill out a daily health declaration for their children on a website before they send them to school that day. And the health declaration essentially is a checklist of sort of, does a child do they have a temperature of a certain level or not? Do they have these symptoms or not, et cetera? And then you sign it. And so obviously this is a daily task. It's a bit routine. as a developer, the first thing I wanted to do was automate it. And so I built a bit of a little scripting application to automate it. I did not put it on a scheduler because I felt that the ethics of it required me to actually run it every morning. So I'm still doing it every day as every other parent is. But the difference is I'm running an application to do it instead of logging onto the website, clicking on the checklists, check buttons, and signing in. I'm having an application do it for me, but I am actually executing the application, which means there is some, declaration every day. I'm not just letting it run it for me on its own. And I do that headless with a head, meaning I'm watching it happen because it's actually kind of fun to watch it. And for me, it's also a visual affirmation that it's done it for me. So I feel confident then sending my kids into the classroom that day, knowing that my application for some reason didn't bug out and it actually committed the declarations correctly. It was fun to build. So we have this browser, headless true, and then we're going to say now we have the instance of the browser. Oh yes, cucumber tests are awesome. Watching Group do its thing, 100% correct, Exegete. There's so much fun you can do with like web drivers and playing around with the web programmatically. So browser go to, which does what it sounds like. Go to the URL. So now we're going to go, I misspelled that. There we go. Browser.go to the URL. And then we are going to say that so now we have this, website, right? We have the data from the website. We want to now parse it. We're going to use Nokogiri to parse it. And what we're going to do is we're going to say it's using this syntax, and I always forget the name for this syntax. Exegete or someone else, do you remember the name for this exact syntax? Like, what's this called? There's a term for this, if someone remembers it. But basically, let me see if I can find it on the web. Ruby double pipe or equals, right? It does have an exact name, though, I think, right? Maybe it's optional assignment. That might be correct. So what it actually does is, let's see if we can find a good encapsulation of it. Oh, look at this term. This sounds very official. And it has 619 upvotes on Stack Overflow. Conditional assignment operator, right? That sounds very official to me. Let's go with that. It means if A is undefined or falsy, then evaluate B and set A to the result, right? Hello, Manup 2005. Nice to meet you. Welcome. So if A is undefined or falsy, then it evaluates B, right? So what we're doing here when we're writing this is parse page. If this is either undefined or a falsy value, then do this, right? Which is pretty cool. I like the syntax. Okay, so we're saying parse page is going to equal this. Nokogiri HTML.parse browser.html. So remember, browser is sort of an object holding all this data, and this is one of the attributes on it of HTML, which is, again, one of the beauties of Ruby is it is what it sounds like. It is the HTML of the website. So we now have sort of a parsed version of that website, which means we can access the data in it a bit easier, and we are going to get the answer. The answer would be parse page.css. We're going to need to find the answer on the website. We can find the answer with various mechanisms. One mechanism that a lot of people prefer is to find it through its CSS class or CSS naming. And that hopefully means that the CSS structure is built with good naming and easy to find things through it. So we want the H1 with the name of is-it, and we want the text from it. And then self.checkText answer. So we get the answer, and then we're going to, again, run this method we have not yet built, but we'll check that text for us and do something with the text. So let's build the check text. If there's any questions at this point or any comments, please feel free to ask them or offer them. Glad to discuss as we go through this. So what does check text do? Let's build it. So it takes in the data, which is the answer, right? Or what we think is the answer. If the data is equal to an empty string, or the data is nil, and we need one more there, or the data is nil. So we want to output something to the console of our application. There was no text received from a web scrape. Right. And we want to exit, an early exit out of it, because there's just nothing there. Okay. But else, there was data in the text received from a web scrape. And we're going to store that text in a method we're going to store that text. And that's what we do here. Veron Barad asks, will this thing execute and manipulate the HTML based on JS that is loaded in the browser on that page? This thing, yes, this application will in fact access the website. This website is ittheweekend.com, actually does use JavaScript to display this text, and it will get the text through that JavaScript application, JavaScript script that's running in the background in this website, and it will get the answer. So in this case, it would be no for today. It is not the weekend. Yes, that is correct. It will indeed do that, which is also one of the reasons why we are using Watt here to get this scraping, and not only Nokogiri and scraping it manually, because we want to use the Chrome WebDriver specifically to help navigate through the JavaScript that's in this website. So this website looks really simple, but if you actually inspect this website, you would see that there's like some JavaScript running in the background, which does this pretty no here. Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. So store text. So let's store the text. Self.store text. And let's call that text, not text. So now we're going to actually access our database. We're going to create a new record in our diff storage table. And we're going to say that the website data column in this record is going to equal the text that we pass in. And if it was saved correctly, meaning that if this successfully executed, we'll output out to the console that the record updated. I guess we could say saved as well, but I put updated there successfully. And then we're going to return the record. I realize now, as I'm writing this again, we don't need to write return. Return is implicit in Ruby. We could just say record, but whatever. We can always let linter correct it later, but it makes it a bit more explicit what we're doing, but we'll return the record. So that is the scraper class, right? The next class we want to build is actually where we're going to now we'll interact with Vonage and the Vonage SMS API. So up until this point, we've been scraping a website. We've been creating database records in our database table, and we've been building the logic to compare from yesterday to today's data. Now, as part of our logic of our application, we want to then send the answer for that day, is it the weekend, to our subscribers. And we're going to send that using the Vonage SMS API. So if we opened up our messenger model, and here we have a beautiful, clean, baby, fresh messenger model, we're going to build a method here called send update message. And some things will change here. Not much of it will change, because this is essentially the same in structure in the Ruby SDK as it was when I wrote this in March. The only difference is that the namespace is now Vonage and not Nexmo. So we're going to instantiate a client. First, actually create the method. Send update message, which will take a list of the recipients. And yesterday and today, the data from yesterday and today. And we don't need it as an instance variable, so let's make the local variable client equals Vonage client.new. And this creates a new instance of the Vonage Ruby SDK. And it takes in a couple credentials as parameters. And for the different APIs for Vonage require different credentialing. Some of them a bit more, some of them a bit less. The SMS API only really requires your API key and API secret, which you can obtain from your API dashboard. So when you log on to the Vonage API dashboard, it's actually the first thing you'll see on the API dashboard is your API key and API secret, which then you can copy and paste in here. So API key will be the Vonage API key, and the API secret will be the Vonage API secret. Where do these come from? As I mentioned before, we're storing these as environment variables in our Rails application. So that presents a couple advantages. One is it's a universal place to store them, where we can access them throughout our application without having to copy and paste the same data in multiple places. And another advantage is that we don't need to expose confidential information like credential data in places where we want to commit to GitHub or other version controls application software where others can see it. So this lets us access it without exposing it, and also makes it accessible throughout without having to keep on writing the same thing over and over again. And these things are stored in a .n file, which would look like this: Vonage API key and Vonage API secret equals whatever you're going to equal to, whatever you might want it to be, etc. Okay, so we have now our client. We're going to use that client to then send the SMS. But first, we'll just output to the Rails console that we're sending a message to each recipient, not recipientee, but recipient. And recipients dot, did I spell that right? No, I didn't. Recipients dot each do. I used to work for a company where they had two database tables, one called referral and one called referrals. And one of them was spelled incorrectly and the other one was spelled correctly for the word referral. And I did a lot of database work back then, tons of SQL work, and just having to remember which one was spelled correctly, which one was spelled incorrectly, and having to keep both spellings in my head all the time drove me crazy. So recipients dot each dot do. So for each recipient, we want to send a message. Yes, actually, I'm using a .n file for the environment variable. So you see the .n file is over here. It's grayed out because it's part of my git ignore, which means it's not going to be committed to repository. And the .m.example is sort of what it would look like, what it does look like without data in it. Yes, the .n file right there. Okay. So recipients no worries, I miss a lot of things too. It happens all the time. Recipients dot each dot do. So for each recipient, we want to send the message if the recipient subscribed equals true. So if you recall, we set in the database table for recipients a Boolean column called subscribed. And that enables us to only send this message to those people who want to receive the message, which is very helpful. So if they do want to receive it, if they are still actively subscribed to this service, then we're going to send the message. So client.sms.send. And the SMS class in the Ruby SDK has a method called send, which takes in a from, a to, and text. It also has other optional parameters as well. One that's really cool is called Unicode, which allows you, so for example, if your text was Hebrew, meaning non-English characters, so then you could send that and be processed correctly and received correctly on the recipient end. So there's a lot of different variables and parameters. We only need these three, which are the three required ones: from, to, and text. From will be our from number. We're also putting that in our environment variables, which is our Vonage virtual provision phone number. So it's the phone number that we license from Vonage to send SMSs with. SMS messages, I think, is more correct. And the to would be the recipient number. So recipient dot number from the database. And the text is actually be dynamically provided from the weekend message. So self dot weekend message yesterday, today. We need to build that method as well, but we imagine the method, we see it in our head, we just need to actually build it. So we now have this beautiful method called send update message. The last thing we need to do is create the weekend message, last couple things. So let's do that. So self.weekend message yesterday, today. If today is equal to yesterday, so one of the things I love about writing code is you get to write these fun kind of like logic fun games. Like this is like almost a philosophical conundrum. Is yesterday equal to today? Let me examine that question. For us, it's an actual data question. Is the text in the variable held in the variable called today equal to the text held in the variable called yesterday? But it sounds so philosophical. So if today is equal to yesterday, meaning there was not a change, then the response would be whatever you say here. And the response would be today is the same as yesterday, and the answer is today. Great. Else, oops. There we go. Else, if today does not equal, there's also a typo there. It's good to see. If today does not equal yesterday, and the response would be this. That sounds like a riddle, right? It's either Lolo Coda wrote it sounds like a riddle. It definitely sounds like a riddle. It also sounds like a great philosophical conundrum, which I just love. It brings back my previous career, sort of as in theology, except it's concrete coding questions, which is awesome. Okay, so I keep on going back instead of back. Okay. So if today is equal to yesterday, then today is the same as yesterday. If today does not equal yesterday, then today is not yesterday. Today is now a new day, and this is the day. But if something is different, like what is the other option here? So we want to create a sort of an all encapsulating option where either today is not equal to yesterday or today is equal to yesterday. If neither of those are true, which I don't know how neither of those could be true, but in some world they might be true, we'll create another option called today and I was clever back then when I wrote this. We write that today and yesterday are both neither affirmative or positive. Are we in an alternative dimension of time and space? We very well might be. So we've created, I keep on going back instead. Okay. So we've created this, and the last thing we want to do here is compose the message. So so we have the string now in the response variable, compose the message called response. Okay, and the compose message called response will hold basically a here doc of the string that we're going to send through the text. Compose message response, and it's going to be a here doc. Hello, it is a new day. But is it a weekend day? It's a very important question. Perhaps one of the most important questions. We will find out with the response that we pass in. And then, of course, as very important for any SMS list, you want to provide a user with the ability to unsubscribe. Remove from the list, please respond with 1. Great. And that's it. And one more method as well, which is to send the removal message. Basically, so if somebody unsubscribes, you want to give them the option to unsubscribe, and you want to confirm that they've unsubscribed. So let them know that it was successful. So send removal message, taking in the user, and you know what? That's why we made an instance variable, because we're using it again. So actually, let's do this. So we make that available to be used throughout the application. And we can use it again over here. Send from, again, our number, our Vonage provision number, that allows us to send an SMS to the person, to the user itself, and the text of you have been successfully removed. Great. So that's our messenger class. So we together in this time, what have we done? We have built a new Rails application. We have we could use an attributor method. It's 100% true. So Exegete asked any reason why we're using an instance variable instead of an attributor method. We could definitely use an attributor method instead, and that's probably a better paradigm. It's me typing really quickly on the fly, but a method would probably a better way, and then invoking the method. 100% correct. So what have we done together is we have built this new Rails application. We have defined the database schema for it. We have created the web scraping functionality. We've created the database to hold the difference between the text from yesterday and today. And we have created the business logic to send the SMS messages using the Vonage SMS API. What have we not done together during this time? We have not defined the recipient model for this. And we have not created the controller or the routes, meaning the application logic and the flow of the application based on website address. We have not done that together. And we have not defined the actual website views. So if you would access this website, you wouldn't see anything yet because we haven't created the, in essence, the HTML pages. And we also, very importantly, have not created the schedulers that does this on a daily basis for us. So there's a lot still yet to do, but we have run out of time. But thankfully, we know that the work is long, the day is short, but we can always come back to things again. And with this, not only do you have to come back to it and code it on your own, but there is a fully working version of this ready for you to use on GitHub. So if we look over here, we will see that there is this thing called the Ruby SMS Weekend Checker. And you can find this at this link. I'm sending it in text, which is github.com/nexmo community/Ruby SMS Weekend Checker. And you can find the whole working code for this, including a button that lets you deploy this to Heroku automatically. So if you're not familiar, Heroku is sort of a cloud service provider. And with this button, you can click this button and will instantiate, if you have a Heroku account already, it will go into your Heroku account and create a Heroku application using the code from this demo app, asking you to provide some variable data like your API key and secret and your phone number, and it will take you and create that application for you and give you a fully working web app, which is pretty cool. And if you want to do this locally, you can actually run the instructions here, which is more of a condensed version of the instructions, or you can follow the tutorial from here, and I'll post the link for that here as well. Which is over here. So, and you can find that tutorial on our blog, nexmo.com/blog, or you can go to the actual repository, github.com/nexmo-community, and find the weekend checker there and clone it and run it. So we have done a lot together, but like a lot of things in life, we didn't get finish it, but that's okay, because we will be back together for the episode 2 of Vonage Gems on November 18th at 11:30 a.m. GMT to discuss actually something really cool, which is our platform tool that we have built internally and open source, which enables you to build developer portals, customize fully functioning developer portals with this really cool platform tool that we built. I happen to think it's cool because I helped build it. And we'll be joined by my colleague, an awesome person, the technical lead for our developer API platform team. His name is Fabian Rodriguez. So he'll be our guest on November 18th for episode 2 of Ruby Gems. So we look forward to seeing you next time. And as always, keep on coding, and especially coding in Ruby. Thank you all very much.